I mean, what a question. Wow. Glad you, okay. What a question. Hello, Canisia. My question to you, well, it's an invitation. I'd like to ask you to talk to me more about poetry and companionship, or maybe poetry as companionship. And this question was prompted by what I found to be the very beautiful and generous way that you thank your companions at the close of your poetry collection. And it seemed to me that I surmised that poetry as a practice is about a form of kind of thinking with or talking with or writing with across languages, cultures, histories, in friendship, or perhaps not always in friendship. So that's my intuition from reading your work, and I wondered if you could expand on this for me and tell me whether I've got it right or not at all.
Thank you for that lovely question, Kate. Yes, all of that is true. I think writing for me is a practice of relation, a practice of relationality, a practice of the kind of ethics of what it is to be alive together in space and time, in motion, in stoppage. And that's poetry. The momentum of a poem depends on how language can make these various things come alive. And I have felt a really deep companionship with the work of others, with work that opens up the world for me newly, that helps me break something open for myself also. And so naming those writers and thinkers and artists who accompany me through that journey, I think is vital. It's a vital part of the actual work that a poem does, because the poem stops. It doesn't end. And so what continues with the reader, I am also the reader, what continues beyond where the poem stops has everything to do with what I owe to the people who help me think and feel and move through the world through poetry. So that sense of being alongside in ways that challenge, in ways that harmonize, in ways that create dissonance, but I'm always looking for something generative. And that is what the poem allows for us to do, to be generative within language, not always to dominate and to think primarily that something must be comprehended. You know, sometimes what you have is a gesture, and you take that gesture into the next thing, into the next hour, into the next day, you know? And so every time I come back to the page, I always want to be aware of the people who've helped me, the writers who've helped me, the artists, the thinkers who've helped me arrive at those things.
Hello, Nathan. I have a question for you, which I realize is a personal one, but if I may, I'd like to ask you about the ways in which living with young children feeds your creative practice. And this is a question that I think women practitioners often get asked, but it's quite rare to find someone talking about fatherhood as being a kind of force that feeds and nourishes his work.
Yeah, so I think for myself, having children made me reflect about my own childhood and my own parents and my life, and open my heart in ways that I think I probably wouldn't have had otherwise. I don't really know that every person needs that experience to open certain things emotionally, but for me, I did. It was really life-changing in that way. And I think one of the things as a parent that I feel ever presently is that I'm always somehow failing, because no matter what you say or don't say or do or don't do, you always feel like, oh, I could have done better. I could have said the right thing, or been more nurturing, or been more firm, or been more this, or been more that. And of course, the reality is, children are their own people who are going to do their own thing and have to grow without you. So it's a beautiful, wonderful journey to be on. I wouldn't change it for the world. And I think also, practically speaking, it made it very challenging as a writer. And strangely enough, I think having the practical, limitations about how much time you have made me want to write more, because it made me realize, oh, this is really, really important to me.
For Kate, are there any practices or problems or fascinations within translation that would be productive if pulled through other forms of writing or art production? Can you talk us through a couple of them?
Thank you, Renee, for your question. When I think of translation practice, I don't think of it as a bounded practice. I think of it more as a kind of composite activity, kind of made up of a whole array of different actions and gestures and practices, which I think are already running through so many other areas of activity. To talk through some of them, reading would be an obvious one. You know, reading is one of the composite layers of translation. Writing would be another one. Attention, a certain kind of form of attention. A willingness to take on the fate, if you like, of a work that you didn't produce yourself. And I think what I was trying to do in this little art was actually to kind of do some of the work that you're suggesting, of kind of pulling them out, separating them out, but in order to then kind of recompound them back together. Because I think we have translation in the recognizable or conventional sense when all of those layers are kind of compounded and made thick together. So when you have reading and writing and attention and reproduction or representation and responsibility, among others.
Kate, what as a translator have you had to rethink about how meaning is created? Or if nothing has changed in your thinking, does a hawk and an ostrich cause you to think differently about the verb to fly?
I probably didn't think especially deeply about how meaning is created until I started translating. So I think translation has been this kind of ongoing education and kind of troubling around how meaning is created. Each translation decision at the level of the micro and the macro is its own inquiry, new inquiry, renewed inquiry into how meaning is created. I think that's how I would answer that rich first question. And then the second question, well, to fly, I think as translators, you're often dealing with these kind of the relationship between general categories and more specific local ones. So like the general verb to fly, which would be a kind of catch-all verb, I guess. And then within that, you have further specificities like to soar or to swoop or to flutter or to not fly would be a counterexample. So that would be my question. Yeah, how much can to fly hold? How many kind of forms of flying can to fly hold? And at what point in a kind of meaning-making process or a reproduction process might you want to localize and specify the form of flying or not flying or failing to fly? Hello, Vivian. My question to you is something that I know you deal with and have dealt with in so many different ways in your work. So I guess it's a repeat question, but I wondered if you could just tell me or formulate an answer for me now in this context about reading and what the activity of reading is to you and how it takes place in your life.
It means the world to me. It's solace, it's consolation, it's company, it's excitement, it's peace, it's being in the world, out of the world. It's all of those things. Where do I read? Since the pandemic, my reading actually became more organized than it ever has been before. So for this whole past year, I read 4 hours a day, usually between 4 and 8. And lying on my bed with the cats, with my cats on the bed with me. When the cats are curled up beside me and I'm propped up against the pillows and reading at 4 in the afternoon, I am utterly and entirely at peace.
Hello, Dionne. My question for you relates to something I read in an interview you once gave, where you said, "My concern is not that the reader builds a world." And I'd be fascinated to hear you speak more about this, about where the world is for you in relation to your books, whether its place or the ways a reader might bring in the world changes when you're writing narrative fiction compared to when you're writing poetry, and whether you even find it meaningful to use the phrase "the world."
In my novel Theory, I was not concerned with building a physical world for the reader, right? So I was not concerned with putting a tree outside or marking that there's a house with a street, there's a street with a house, or there was an ocean, or any of those things. I was concerned with the interior life of the protagonist, of the first-person narrator. And the first-person narrator was only concerned with her interior life also, right? Or her intellectual life, or her philosophical life. The other thing is, I trust the reader. That is, I do not think that I have to say, we are in this city, walking down this street. At least that is not the intention in this novel, to do those things. But in general, I trust the reader to walk into the novel with me. So this novel simply said to the reader, I am in this day, right? And expects the reader to understand that, because there is something about, the commonality in which we all live, that that the novel and the protagonist of the novel expects the reader to understand at all levels, right? So that was my project in Theory, not to coddle the reader or to disrespect the reader.
Kate, I understand you are a translator. I've known other writers who were translators, and what I've always wondered is how translating has affected your writing rather than the other way around. I can easily see how your own writing would nourish the act of translation, but has translating itself ever suggested to you things that became usable for you in your own actual writing?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that question, Vivian. Very currently, very much at the moment, I've just begun a new translation project, a novel called in French Lily Pleure, Lily's Crying, by Hélène Bessette. And she writes she wrote these extraordinary, to my mind, lineated novels. So novels which use the line and spacing and rhythm in very particular, I think, very exciting ways. And there's something of the kind of energy that's happening, energy and boldness and courage that I identify in Bessette's sentences, and especially her use of the page space, actually, which is something that really interests me in my work and something I try and work with, which is definitely infecting and energizing me back. And although Bessette is already kind of influencing my manner, or giving me new permission, I think, in my manner of writing the long form, I hope that translating her work might lead to a kind of new sequence of works, actually, that are kind of directly or indirectly informed by translating. So it seems that unlike your friends who are writers bring writing to bear on translating, I think for me it's the other way around. I think translating is what opens up writing for me.